The first thing that we're going to do is look at cropping. Cropping is not a really fancy kind of a thing, but there's some neat things you can do in Lightroom that make it quite effective, and it's something to do right away, at least your basic cropping. Why? Because you get rid of junk. You get rid of stuff that you don't care about. I mean, you don't want to be processing your image and developing it and making the most out of it, and you got this stuff that's distracting you and you really don't like in the picture. Get rid of it right away. Well, the crop tool is in the toolbar that is at the upper part of the panel. It's the little box. And as soon as you click on that, this panel opens up and there's lots of stuff in there, but we don't have to do all of that stuff. The key to this is to understand that the lock over on the right means that the proportions are locked, so that if I click and drag on anything, even if I click and drag on an edge, everything changes. Okay, I'm going to click down to reset, make it back to where it was before. One place where this can be important is for a slideshow. You don't want to have the proportions constantly changing. It gets really annoying and people start seeing the change in the proportions and they're not looking at your pictures anymore. So by keeping them consistent, you don't have that issue. Well, once you do that, you may decide, though, that you don't want the proportions the same because you just want to get rid of some junk. And so you can move things in or out individually if you unlock the lock. Then you can do whatever you want, and it does not work proportionally. Okay, I'm going to reset that. Now if I go to original, I just clicked on original, you can see there's all these numbers. These are other proportions that you can use. So I could use a 1:1. Now that's not inches or anything else like that, it's a proportion. Because there are no inches or anything here, that's only if you export out of Lightroom. So it's 1:1, that's a square. A square is actually a really interesting proportion. And if I double click on this or hit return or enter, it gives me the cropped image. Now, one thing to keep in mind is this is not permanently cropped. I can go back and recrop this and do whatever I want lots of times with no damage to the image. Nothing is ever changed on the image. That's important. So that's kind of cool. I mean, the square crop is really interesting. A lot of people have discovered that this is really a fun way of dealing with pictures. And that's actually pretty neat. I like what's happening in that particular picture. This is an area near Bryce Canyon. There's a national forest that is on the north side of Bryce Canyon that is never as crowded as Bryce Canyon and has a lot of the same formations. So I'm going to go back up to the crop tool and I'm going to click on reset, so it takes me back to where I was before. Now another thing about this is if you run your cursor outside of the box, you can actually rotate the image. You can actually see the grid. So suppose that tree, right? You can see there's a tree that's sort of in the middle. I wanted it to be vertical. Okay, now if I double click, this tree going right up and down at kind of the left third, it is vertical because I was able to use that grid to do that. And you can correct horizons, you can do all kinds of things. I actually prefer to use that. Reset this. You can actually use this angle. If you click on the angle and you can click and drag and actually match a horizon or something like that that has a straight line that you want it to be level, and it will level out the picture. I can do the same thing on something that's vertical. So I click on that and I could do it on that tree now, and it makes the tree vertical. Now the reason I usually don't work that way is because you don't need to unless you have some really precise needs or you're having trouble really hitting it, because when you simply move your cursor outside, it's so easy to see what you're getting. And you can immediately start cropping it if it isn't exactly what you wanted when you did that change of angle. So let's try one more thing just to show you. Now suppose I wanted a specific proportion like 8:10, and you can see it sets it up in the middle. I don't want it in the middle. What happens with the crop tool here is you click on the picture and move the picture behind the cropped area. So I can get whatever I want. Let's say I like that. And I actually like that. I think that's a nice proportional way of dealing with this particular composition. The original composition shot with a very wide angle lens with the full frame of the original really gives a very wide area. So, and that's fine if you want the wide area. Actually, personally, I don't think that left side is all that interesting, but this particular proportion, this is shot with APS-C, which is 35 millimeter proportion, gives me more stuff than I really need. So why not go to 8 by 10? So it's only what I really care about. And now I have what I'm actually going to work on. So the crop tool helps you get to where you want to get going right away. Now, another cool thing about this is that if you want to try different crops and compare them, it's really easy to do. So let's go back up here, and I'm going to reset that. And I'm going to go down to the film strip, which is F6. And now you notice I actually already have what's called a virtual copy. Some of you may know this, but I'm going to move this way up. This, I'm working on a virtual copy, not on the original, which I actually have processed before. But if I want to do different crops, I can create a virtual copy. If you right click, and you can see this is, I know, falling off of your main area, but down at the bottom you'll see something that says create virtual copy. There's more stuff on the right click here. Create virtual copy. And now I have another image here, and there's this little flappy thing that looks like a page is turning. That tells you it's a virtual copy. And you can do things like I can go to this one and crop this to 8 by 10. And then I can go to the other one and crop it to 1 by 1 or whatever else I want to do. And now I'm going to get rid of this. You also notice that I made this bigger or smaller by dragging on the edge. I think that's a really useful thing to be able to do as well. Also, you notice I right-clicked again, and let me tell you, I don't care whether you use a Mac or a PC, use a right-click mouse. It's called a secondary click for the Mac, but it is so helpful when you're working with Lightroom or actually any Adobe product, because they all use context-sensitive menus. You notice that that menu is very different than when I right-clicked in the other lesson on one of the parts of the panel on the right, because it's the context, and it actually gives you things you can choose based on where you're clicking within the interface. All right, let's get rid of the panel at the bottom so we can look at this picture. I can go back and forth between the pictures by using my grid on my second screen, or I can use the arrow to go back. And here's where I said I liked the 8 by 10. This is what we're going to work on in our next set of lessons.